South African teacher is helping vulnerable children continue learning during lockdown. This is Africa Live. A warm welcome. I am Peninah Karibe. Let's have a look at other stories coming up this hour. How stakeholders in South Africa and Zimbabwe are handling COVID-19 disruptions in the tobacco industry. And what African writers and publishers are doing to connect with their audiences during the coronavirus pandemic. We begin with the COVID-19 pandemic. The number of confirmed cases has topped 2.7 million globally. Over 190,000 people have died. The US has seen over 3,000 deaths during the past 24 hours. Total cases there surpass 869,000, over a third of the global total. Meanwhile, nearly half of all cases are in Europe, with Spain and Italy the hardest hit. Spain is the second country to surpass 200,000 total cases. Turkey is now a hotspot. Its total infections have surpassed 100,000. The Chinese mainland confirmed 6 new cases on Thursday, 2 of them imported. Heilongjiang province reported 3 local transmissions, while Guangdong had 1. The US remains the hardest hit country in the coronavirus pandemic. As confirmed cases near 900,000, many more people are losing their jobs. Up to 22 million Americans have applied for unemployment relief for the first time. Giles Gibson has the latest.
There were some extraordinary scenes on the floor of the US House of Representatives, with representatives spaced out around the chamber and also lots of lawmakers wearing scarves or masks over their face to try to stop the potential spread of COVID-19. Now, what's in this legislation? It's a $484 billion bill, and mostly what it does is boost funding for a small business loan program that's been maxed out in the last week or so. It also provides extra funding for testing and for hospitals here in the United States. Meanwhile, we also got an update from authorities in New York State about antibodies testing that they've been carrying out. They've tested randomly 3,000 people, and they say as a result of these results that they've got, they're estimating that 13.9% of the population of New York State have had COVID-19. Now here's the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, talking about why these results are so useful to local authorities.
Upstate New York is 3.6%. New York City is 21%. What you do in a place with 21% is not the same thing necessarily that you would do in a place with 3.6%. It's just not. It's the same theory that some states open now and New York doesn't.
Now, Governor Cuomo did stress that these are just initial results and that the state will be carrying out more testing in the coming weeks to try to get a much clearer picture of what's actually happening in their state. Giles Gibson, CGTN, Washington.
The Egyptian ambassador to China, Mohamed El Badri, says Egypt has applied China's experience to its own fight against COVID-19. He also says it's time for the world to work together faced with a global health threat and economic recession. Our reporter Wu Guoshu sat down with him in Beijing.
Mr. Ambassador, we are also worried about the situation in your country. How is it now, and what measures are being taken? Did China's experience help?
Oh yes, it helped a lot. China was the role model for all of us to use the best practices in China and to start to sort of adapt it to our local environment. As an embassy, we have shipped immediately to Cairo all the best practices undertaken by the Chinese side, and this was very, very beneficial. The president designated the prime minister at the head of a crisis group management for COVID-19, and it was able to gather and mobilize all the resources in this regard. And that's why, in answer to your question, that's why so far in Egypt it is still controlled, and our numbers are very good. So far, I think we're around 3,650, which is quite good comparatively speaking. Of course, good is 0, but there is no country without 0. So comparatively, we are doing very well. The government has a plan, has laid down a plan, multifaceted plan, and it is functioning quite well.
Some Western politicians have been blaming China for the spread of the coronavirus. What's your view on this?
No, actually, it's, in world politics, this is superpower business. It usually happens across history. I mean, I'm not a scientist, so I don't think that my opinion is based on any kind of scientific evidence in this regard. I think when things calm down on the international sphere, then we are going to be able to see. But now it is a threat to humanity as a whole. And I think that the best way to look at it is how we are going to cooperate as human beings, not as nationals. The world has not witnessed something with such a big pandemic since the influenza in 1919 and 1920. We have to be very vigilant about it. And even this pandemic did not stop the economic cycles that are going there. Today, we are witnessing a general massive slowdown in all of the economies in the world. We are witnessing an era, some of the chief economists are saying that it is very close to the Great Depression. So it's time to put our hands together.
The Chinese ambassador to Ethiopia says China's donations to Africa in the fight against the coronavirus is a reciprocation of Africa's support when China was battling the virus early this year. China has donated medical supplies to African countries to battle the spread of the virus. This includes drugs, personal protective equipment, shoe covers, gloves and other essentials. The distribution is being coordinated from Ethiopia's Bole Airport in Addis Ababa. The latest batch of supplies that arrived on Thursday will be distributed to 12 African countries, including Angola, Cameroon and Somalia.
China-Africa friendship and cooperation is a telling testament that we have been together. So when China was the epicenter of the virus, we have received solidarity support from Africa. African Union, African leaders, African government, institutions and people, they offer their solidarity and support to China. And we cherish that, we remember that, and we will reciprocate that.
It's been a month since South Africa's nationwide lockdown began. The lockdown is part of government's multi-pronged approach to curbing infections. CGTN's Angela Kupla takes a look at what else is being done to end the country's coronavirus crisis.
One essential component of the battle against the virus is finding a vaccine. It's a complex process starting with ethics approval, researcher selections, and finding the patients prepared to act as test cases.
And then, of course, we have to decide what drugs to use. And, we started off with a bunch of drugs. And, of course, in other countries, the same drugs that we started off with were shown not to work. So you can't use those drugs that have already been shown not to work. So the scramble now is to pick drugs that we think have a high chance of being shown to work.
There are two challenges in the fight: finding the commodities needed and changing people's behavior.
If you don't have running water and soap, it's difficult to keep your hands clean. If you're living in a room with 10 other people, it's difficult to do physical distancing. But we know those things work. So there's context, there's behavior, and then of course there's on the supply side all the things that we need to do from the health sector.
South Africa has one of the widest gaps between rich and poor. This makes the war against the virus more challenging.
So there are no easy solutions. And I think where we are caught is in the major contradictions of this country between those that have and those that have very little and those that have almost nothing. And if you have nothing, Angelo, you don't have anything to lose. So you are less likely to protect yourself, even if the messages are clear.
It's now time for that tactical approach where the army is getting involved with the police so that they can actually make sure that the lockdown actually happens. And it's starting to take effect here in Hillbrow. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
And staying in South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa has announced a phased easing of the COVID-19 lockdown. In his Thursday evening address, Ramaphosa explained the move was to spare the economy and save lives or save jobs. CGTN's Yolisan Jamila has more.
The relaxation of the lockdown is an attempt to kickstart the economy. In his televised address to the nation, President Cyril Ramaphosa stated that the current lockdown has been effective in slowing down the spread of the coronavirus.
By delaying the spread of the virus, we have had time to prepare our health facilities and mobilize some of the essential medical supplies that are needed to meet the unavoidable increase in infections.
Now, government has decided to implement a risk-adjusted strategy, a strategy that will ensure that the state takes a deliberate and cautious approach to the easing of current lockdown restrictions.
While a nationwide lockdown is probably the most effective means to contain the spread of the virus, it cannot be sustained indefinitely. Our people need to eat, they need to earn a living, companies need to be able to produce and to trade, they need to generate revenue and keep their employees in employment.
This approach, the president says, is guided by advice from scientists who have advised that an abrupt and uncontrolled lifting of restrictions could cause a massive resurgence in infections. The president unveiled new alert levels of the lockdown, which will determine which sectors of the economy would be opened in certain areas. 5 different levels will determine the severity of the lockdown from May 1, with 5 being a hard lockdown and 1 being almost completely lifted.
We've decided on this approach because there is still much that is unknown about the rate and the manner of the spread of the virus within our own population. The action we take now must therefore be measured and incremental.
Ramaphosa revealed that South Africa will move from level 5 lockdown, which is currently underway, to level 4 from 1 May. Some businesses will be allowed to resume operations under specific conditions. The return of the workforce will be no more than 1/3 per business, and a work-from-home strategy is still encouraged.
We have to balance the need to resume economic activity with the imperative to contain the virus and save lives.
Over 70,000 Defence Force personnel will be deployed to assist with various parts of the coronavirus response. The president also said borders will remain closed for international travel, excluding for the repatriation of South Africans abroad and foreign citizens. Travel will also remain prohibited to other provinces in the country, except for special circumstances like attending funerals. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
All right, let's get more now on how South Africa is handling this pandemic. Angelo Kupla is live for us in Johannesburg. Angelo, South Africa is set to partially reopen its economy after weeks of a strict national lockdown. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, we've had 5 weeks of this lockdown, that phased-in approach that you heard about earlier. We'll see the mining sector going to the workplace first. We're talking here about a mine like South Deep. We were at the mine today to see how they're ramping up production. So it seems like what's going to happen is they'll allow up to 1/3 per week of the staff complement into the mine through a very strict process. It then will go on to mining, and the mining sector won't go more than 50% for the foreseeable future. So production will be half of what it was before the breakdown, but half is better than nothing, because those people who are on the mines and working on those mines in South Africa will be in play and working and generating revenue. And the reason they've selected the mining sector is simply because there's a strong health and safety ethic involved in the mines. Whenever miners go on leave, they come back, they go through a whole process. There's a whole screening process, a whole testing process, just to make sure that the miners that are coming back haven't picked up any diseases while they've been away. They're monitoring for things like HIV/AIDS, they're monitoring for issues like TB, and the like. So they've got the processes in place, and the miners are used to that kind of process. And the reporting, of course, goes straight back into the National Department of Health. So at the moment, we were expecting more clarity on which other sectors would be going to production level. We haven't had anything yet because the briefing that was planned for today was postponed. So we're expecting more clarity at a later stage. But Ramaphosa did also emphasize that if there's a spike in any increase or number of deaths or infections, he can very quickly reinstitute a higher level, back to level 5, for example. We know that the SME sector has got packages in play. There's tax relief there for them as well. We know that on an individual level, there's a cash and grant increase for the next 3 months. So we'll have to see if these two measures, tackling the supply side and the demand side, actually work to get the market or the economy back on track, Peninah.
And Angelo, how have citizens been coping under lockdown conditions, and what have been the major challenges?
Well, Peninah, it's a case of the rich versus the poor, essentially. Unemployed people, and it's now many more, and they're expected to jump to 1 million people by the end of the year, are looking for food. They're unemployed, they're unlikely to get employment in the foreseeable future, and so they're in long queues looking for food from charities and religious organizations, and that's in the inner city. They're concerned about their next meal. Meanwhile, the middle class and the affluent are locked up in their homes behind high walls, and they're concerned about going to the shops and not getting caught, and also stocking up and making sure that they get some exercise in if they can in their gardens. So it really is a tale of two cities in this regard, Peninah.
And with COVID-19 cases approaching 4,000 there in South Africa, Angelo, what can the government do to balance between stopping the spread of the coronavirus and keeping the economy afloat?
Well, Ramaphosa and his entire command council have all stressed very clearly that the top priority, the only priority at the moment, is to make sure that people are healthy and that people don't succumb to the virus, and that we manage that process as best as we can and do whatever it takes. And that includes increased testing, which has been underway now for just over 2 weeks. And that's an attempt to spot hotspots that might be developing in some areas that weren't being tested before. There's a small percentage, as we know, of people who would need hospitalization. So the Minister of Health is not too concerned about what's happening there. He has enough beds, he says, for now. If there's a spike, there are field hospitals around the country, so that'll take care of that issue. So the balance is happening. The economy, for example, is going to take second place for now. So that phasing in approach that Ramaphosa was talking about on Thursday night is an attempt to manage that transition. Of course, we also heard that 73,000 odd SANDF Army troops are going to be helping the South African police services over time to make sure that there's a natural, simple and easy transition and that people don't step out of line. And also the SANDF are going to be helping in the likes of the healthcare sector, infrastructure provision and maintenance and the like. So there is a phased in approach, but it's safety first. And it's also very important that people's lives are still at the key center of the strategy that the government's going to be imposing. And then we phase in that economic growth. Peninah.
All right, Angelo, thank you for that update. Angelo Kupler live in Johannesburg. Meanwhile, Egypt is easing its coronavirus restrictions over Ramadan. On Thursday, Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli announced changes to curfew and business operating hours. Here's Adel Mahri with more on that.
While neighboring Muslim countries have increased their curfew hours during the holy month of Ramadan, Egypt is taking an opposite measure. Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli has announced less curfew hours. He's also allowing shops and malls to operate on weekends for the first time since the partial lockdown has been imposed.
It's been 3 months since we first reported COVID-19 cases. So far, our infection rates are acceptable and within expectations. They are very reasonable compared to big countries and relative to our 100 million population. The government has emptied huge space in hospitals by moving cases of mild and no symptoms to alternative quarantine facilities. That has given it confidence to relax its preventive measures.
The government says it's alarmed by the huge influx of citizens in markets and shops due to the limited operating hours. It hopes its measures will decrease crowding. Gradual resumption of public services will resume. After the weekend, notary offices will begin operation and new vehicles registration will be open following a month of suspension.
There is agreement that the virus will last for the foreseeable future and we have to adapt to live with it. Until God wills and we have a vaccine for it, it's why we've been studying how life can resume under this pandemic. We must continue with our personal care and protective measures though, so that we won't have to go back to taking harsher measures.
This relaxation to COVID-19 measures will last until the end of Ramadan. By then, the government will have reviewed its measures and could further ease its pandemic regulations. The government wants to avoid the threats and pain such traffic has on the public, in the streets and in markets. But there are concerns that pushing the curfew hours to begin at 9 o'clock in the evening could give enough time for many Egyptians to visit family and friends for their daily Ramadan iftar meal. And that poses risks to increased social gatherings and possible COVID-19 infections. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
To Zimbabwe now, where the country's homeless population has been moved into shelters. The country has also extended its coronavirus lockdown by 2 weeks to curb infections. CGTN's Farai Mwakutuya with the details.
Farai Shumba, Frank Mwambungo and Tatenda Bingwa live on the street, surviving by collecting empty bottles and washing cars. They were rounded up at the start of the national lockdown and brought to a shelter where they're experiencing a world of difference.
You are assured of a decent night's sleep. You are assured of a meal before you sleep. On the street, there's no guarantee of sleeping because of police patrols, and sometimes there's not enough money for food.
They joke how they wouldn't mind COVID-19 lasting till August so they can stay here during the winter.
The coronavirus has changed my life. If I look at my skin right now, it is different because I'm bathing in clean water and I am eating well.
They've all volunteered to help out in the kitchen and yearn for a fresh start.
As for me, my life is changing and I don't wish to go back in the street.
But the transition to shelters has not been easy for everyone.
We have a big challenge of drug addicts, and they are having to scale the Jurawo at Mount Abden to look for drugs, and we have engaged the Ministry of Health and another NGO which is going to deal with the problem of drug addiction.
Those who are willing at this and similar camps for women and children across the country will receive vocational skills training. This park was one of the preferred spaces for street dwellers to put up for the night. Now that they've been cleared out, authorities want to make sure they never have to resort to it for accommodation again.
We would have failed as a ministry if the majority of these people after the lockdown find themselves back to the streets.
The three I spoke to have no intention of doing so. Tatenda wants to operate earth movers. Frank is hoping to get a driver's license, and Farah is going to try his hand at farming in the village, where the air is much better anyway, he says. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Time for us to take a quick break. Here's what's coming up after the break. The United Nations appeals for funds to help Uganda deal with the coronavirus pandemic. And how a South African teacher is helping vulnerable children continue learning during lockdown.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
The United Nations has launched an appeal of $316 million to help Uganda combat the effects of the COVID-19. Millions of Ugandans have been impacted by measures to curb the spread of the virus. Isabel Nakiria reports.
The funds collected will help Uganda continue with its fight against COVID-19. The World Health Organization says some of the funds will be used in testing cargo drivers crossing from neighboring countries. All recent confirmed cases in Uganda are from truck drivers from Kenya and Tanzania, according to the government.
our option is to ensure that this risk is minimized, and that is through screening and making sure that we do testings of people coming in, and we'll be able to track them and minimize the risk of them interacting with the population.
Uganda has registered slightly over 60 cases, most of them imported. The country is on a partial lockdown and has kept its borders open to cargo movement. The stay-at-home orders have affected people's incomes, especially those that live day to day. The UN funds will assist 12.8 million Ugandans who are hardest hit. Support will go to boosting incomes of small business enterprises like market traders and improving access to health, food and nutrition.
We estimate that up to 60% of informal enterprises have stopped their operations or slowed down significantly. This is denying early daily earnings to about 5 to 6 million informal workers across the country.
The government is now distributing food to the urban poor and has asked well-wishers to come in and help. The UN says refugees will also benefit from this food.
Funding for refugee responses across the region has dwindled, as countries around the world have had to focus on their own national responses. This means that the resources available to us become meager in order to feed, clothe, shelter, and protect 1.4 million refugees and the host communities they share the resources with.
Uganda has currently shut its borders to new asylum seekers to slow the spread of COVID-19. The refugee agency says it's trying to put measures in place to prevent transmission in settlements despite challenges of congestion. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
The African Union Peace and Security Council has expressed concerns that funds earmarked for peace building will be diverted to fight COVID-19. CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi spoke to an expert at a Pan-African think tank about the coronavirus pandemic and the implications for peace and security on the continent.
The key issue related to peace and security is also the disruption of, for example, mediation efforts that are ongoing, the implementation of peace agreements that are still ongoing, but unfortunately that are being interrupted by this pandemic, due to the challenges on restriction of movements and mobility of people and goods. This has also affected peacekeeping operations. In this particular situation, this particular vacuum has also been used by non-state actors, by terrorist groups to incite further violence, to gain military advantage on so many on different areas.
One would easily argue that currently all member states are busy, trying to combat COVID-19, and the implementation of measures that are taken by the AU Peace and Security Council might not really be taken at a fast pace as they would have loved.
It's really up to governments, national governments, to also respond effectively and immediately to the needs, based on the needs and based on the emerging challenges in their own national jurisdiction. But they have the support of the African Union. They have the support of all these specialized technical agencies, including the CDC. They have the political support of the African Union Peace and Security Council. But all these intergovernmental bodies need the support of member states. They need the buy-in and political will of member states to actually implement those decisions at their own national level.
On the aspect of mediation, there have been several mediation processes that were ongoing before COVID-19 happened. Do you think it's time for the continent to think outside the box and look for other means other than face-to-face mediation processes or facilitation?
I personally think that, a certain kind of the diplomacy world, for example, the diplomatic world in particular, requires that kind of interpersonal kind of engagement, for the negotiations, to build a common agenda, like a common kind of to build that common vision. It requires that kind of interpersonal engagement. So the mediation part, consultations, of course, there are some ongoing that are happening that have been disrupted. But the most important thing for Africa is also to focus on the prevention aspect, the ones that do not really necessarily require a lot of, prevention is like a little bit less expensive than either mediation or peacekeeping missions and peacekeeping support. The aspect of humanitarian access is one that has been talked about very much, especially for countries that are still affected by peace and security issues. I mean, how do we go about this in a situation whereby movement is a problem, people fear for their own lives? How do we go about this? We've already have like set kind of standards, humanitarian standards that need to guide us in times of conflict and in times of this kind of emergencies and this kind of pandemics. So we have those set standards, global as well as continental set standards that we need to abide to, we need to adhere to this kind of standards.
With schools in South Africa still closed, students from low-income families have been struggling to access education. Many do not have the resources to pursue online classes, but one teacher has come up with a simple idea to help kids learn during the lockdown. CGTN's Julie Shire reports.
South Africa remains one of the most unequal countries in the world. Since schools closed, affluent learners switched to virtual education. But underprivileged students don't have that option. Peninah Karibe is a teacher at Summerwood Primary School in Johannesburg. Karibe was worried her students, who mainly come from Alexandra Township, wouldn't have anything to read during the lockdown. So she made a request.
It's a very, very easy, basic idea that I came up with. And all it is that people have to go into their homes where they are at the moment and they have to look for a children's book. And then all they do is that they record themselves reading the book, or via a WhatsApp message or a video. And then all they do is that they send it to me.
With just one WhatsApp message, Pamela's Read for Hope initiative reached hundreds around the world.
My name's Matthew Scott. I live in Portsmouth, in sunny Southsea in Portsmouth, right on the south coast of England. And I heard from a friend that there were some children in South Africa in a township called Alexandra. Maybe not as privileged as a lot of us are. So I obviously asked if I could read from my first book, Cyril Squirrel and the Wonderfully Worrisome Task. And I was more than happy to do so, just to spread just a little bit of happiness, a little bit of joy.
Author Matthew Scott is only one of hundreds of people who were happy to help.
I've had the most wonderful feedback. It's part of, as Nelson Mandela said, it's the Rainbow Nation. Yet at the moment, for me, it's the Rainbow World, because everybody is putting in and just wants to help. And that is so, so important. Kindness at the moment goes a long way.
Brian Andili and his grandmother are enjoying the stories.
The video Mrs. Kenter sent to my grandchild was helping him a lot, because he was doing nothing during the COVID-19.
I like reading because reading is the best. It has good stories and it's interesting stories. That's why I like reading, and I learn more from reading.
With schools closed, millions of underprivileged children have been left stranded, but Peninah Karibe's small request that reached around the world has brought a beacon of hope to many children who now have the chance to dream of a better tomorrow. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Ghana has developed a COVID-19 tracker app to help trace people infected with the virus. The country hopes to use technology to curb the spread of the pandemic. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai filed the following report.
Radia Mohammed is installing the COVID-19 tracker app on her phone. She doesn't have the virus, but says it may come in handy as cases of infections in Ghana continue to rise.
Since the government has now lifted the lockdown, we are all at risk. So I'm downloading the COVID-19 tracker app to inform the health officials whenever I have symptoms of COVID-19.
Ghana has more than 1,000 cases of the coronavirus. The government has developed the COVID-19 tracker app to trace people infected with the virus.
When the app was launched, it wasn't available on the Android, the Play Store, and then the Apple Store. So basically, it's an APK file. APK file is associated with Android phones only. For example, if a developer is developing an app, they normally create an APK file. You can go to their website and then download and install only on Android.
The app allows people to input data including their telephone number, and information of any symptoms they have of the coronavirus. With such data, health officials can trace contacts of people infected with COVID-19.
The app does not provide medical advice, nor does it provide information on medication. It is an information tool to help all of us to stay safe by providing some basic information and tracking those who might have been infected and providing them with help.
But the app has other limitations. To install it on some Android phones, people have to allow security breaches. IT experts say people who are not tech-savvy may find it difficult to install the app on their phones, and it may limit its effectiveness in contact tracing. IT experts say it may take a while for the app to be available on the Google Play Store or the Apple Store because it has to go through security checks. The government says it is finalizing the process of making the app available on the app stores so that many Ghanaians can download. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
You're watching Africa Live. Coming up in business news. How stakeholders in South Africa and Zimbabwe are handling COVID-19 disruptions in the tobacco industry.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa recently declared a national state of disaster in the country. This has paved the way for the government to make changes to existing legislation in a bid to protect citizens and contain the COVID-19 pandemic. All tobacco and alcohol sales have been prohibited, but the industries have been lobbying to have the restrictions lifted. CGTN Sumitra Naidu has more.
The tobacco industry contributes $1 billion annually to the South African economy. This is a massive contribution and would be welcomed, especially now that the economy is languishing.
The government anticipates to receive approximately 14 billion rands worth of excise taxes during the course of 2020. That's just over 1.2 billion rand per month that the government is expecting to receive. So for every month that the government does not allow cigarettes to be sold, we can expect there to be approximately 1.2 billion rands worth of excise taxes that will not be gathered.
But government has refused to budge in the interests of healthcare. Medical experts have argued that the healthcare system cannot be burdened by tobacco and alcohol-related accidents or occurrences at this time. But the tobacco industry believes more people will suffer if the ban continues.
Normally, people always see just the cigarette as a byproduct of a much bigger value chain. So we start from the seed, from the farmer that actually plants the tobacco crop. And we have many of those that are currently languishing at home that are not able to sell their leaf for processing. We have processors who are not processing.
Liquor bodies have threatened to take government to court, but under the Disaster Management Act, the government is well within its rights to ban industries it deems a risk to the healthcare system. The tobacco industry is trying to convince government to at least look at a partial restriction to allow people to go back to work and consider the economic losses.
For the first 3 weeks, my best guess would be in the order of 900 million rand has been lost in the form of revenues that have not been collected by the state.
With that, we have a whole slew of workers, your farm workers, your farm owners that are not able to actually do anything now. Then you come obviously to the manufacturers, that is us. And these are all people with dependents. We're talking in excess of about 30,000 dependents in that value chain alone.
Government has heard the pleas of the tobacco industry, but still believes that it's more important to guard the healthcare of the nation as it tries to contain the spread of COVID-19. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Zimbabwe's tobacco selling season will begin on Wednesday, the 29th of April, a week later than planned. This aims to give industry stakeholders time to put in place measures to prevent the spread of COVID-19. CGTN's Farai Mokutuya has the following report.
It's all quiet for now at the auction floors ahead of delayed deliveries that will begin on the 29th of April under strict controls.
On the floor, we allow no more than 20 farmers inside at any one given time. That is in addition to the normal members of staff of the sales floor. So everything will be done properly. As the people walk onto sales floor premises, they'll go through a footpath. They'll also go through a misting place where to sanitize their the outside body, and then there will also be facilities for hand washing, soap and water, or even alcohol-based sanitizers. And every person will have to wear a mask. In addition to that, we are in the process of arranging that every employee of sales floors, including TIMB employees, are screened for COVID-19 virus.
The new protocols extend downstream. The tobacco selling season is a bonanza for traders and vendors who normally set up hundreds of stalls outside the auction floors, hoping to turn as many sales as they can to farmers after they get paid. But this year, there'll be none of that. Only growers, licensed transporters and buyers will be allowed here. To decongest further, there are 6 centers out of Harare to buy up a crop that will be lower in volume but of a higher grade than last year's.
The quality of the crop is also very, very good. The rainy season that we had, although it was largely unfavorable for grain crops, in many ways it was very, very favorable for quality tobacco. We will certainly have over 225 million kilograms of tobacco this coming season. But we will not, obviously, achieve the figure of 259 that was achieved last year. So it will be somewhere between 220 and maybe about 240 million kilograms.
Prices should be higher too, which will be consolation for farmers having to wait a little longer than usual to cash in. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
In Uganda, employees are adopting new ways of working remotely during the COVID-19 pandemic. Using digital platforms like Zoom, employees are going about their duties without physically meeting their employers. CGTN's Hilary Ayasiga reports.
Solomon Tumwesije presents his day's work plan. This is not his usual workplace, but at home.
The virtual office is as convenient as it gets under the circumstances that we are in now. We can still meet online, you can share. Typically you would meet your team and show them something practically on the PC.
The Uganda government is encouraging people to stay home during the lockdown. But to keep business going, Solomon and his workmates meet often on this office virtual setup. But it comes at a cost.
Data drops sometimes, the signal goes off sometimes, but we have to work with what we have. So sometimes you have to find yourself working with 2-3 different service providers to maintain a smooth run in the network.
And he's not the only one working from home. Andrew Connor is an architect.
WhatsApp is what I'm using so much because there I can send the proposal, what I call the preliminary proposal. I send it to the client looks at it, and then from there he's able to tell me that, I want this to be like this, I want this to be like that.
All this comes at a time when employers are threatening to lay off workers because of the impact of COVID-19.
People can keep their jobs if only they can be able to adapt some tools. The problem that many people do have is that they resist change even when change is here to stay. So you either adapt to the technology or you die.
Solomon believes that switching to digital platforms could help many businesses keep afloat during and after the COVID-19 pandemic. Hilary Ayasiga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
This is Africa Live. Coming up after the break, what African writers and publishers are doing to connect with their audiences during the coronavirus pandemic.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
to bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Each year, African cities play host to a number of literary festivals. But as the coronavirus pandemic shuts international borders, writers and publishers have had to find new ways to connect with their audiences. CGTN's Lindy Mtongana tells us more.
The coronavirus pandemic has forced the global literary festival circuit to surrender to postponements and cancellations. But this hasn't stopped some passionate African bibliophiles from finding innovative ways to connect writers with their readers. The Afrolit Sans Frontières Virtual Literary Festival is the brainchild of author and publisher Zukiswa Wana. The 8-day festival brings book lovers together through live events on Facebook and Instagram.
Firstly, you don't need to think about being stuck in traffic to go to a literary festival, you know. So all you need to have is Wi-Fi and be in your home, and then you can just open your Instagram, and then there we are, live.
Now in its second season, the Afrolit Virtual Festival will see 16 African writers from 14 countries stream content in English, French and Portuguese.
This is a way to open up the literary scene to people who may otherwise not have found it. And I think it can be very encouraging, inspiring, and I hope that even when the pandemic is over, that what we're building here now will continue.
The festival includes book readings and lively Q&A sessions, with the focus on sharing the diversity of African literature in terms of themes and language.
Usually we listen and read more in English and French, of course. Now Portuguese is not so common for you guys, but this will increase our level of communication. It's amazing, amazing. I've been talking to people from Malawi, from Rwanda, from Namibia, even Namibia. We usually don't talk to writers from Namibia. So this is a great achievement from this festival.
A lot of exciting African literature, as you know, has been coming up. There is everything under the sun. There's humor, there's crime fiction, there's science fiction. And I wanted to try and highlight this.
The coronavirus may have brought big gatherings to a standstill, but as this virtual festival shows, a pandemic highlights the importance of literature.
What is the most effective role that writers play in a global pandemic?
Well, I think the most effective role is what we've always done, is to tell stories. So I think we need to work more, because now everybody is at home and everybody is listening. Everybody wants to hold on to something or to travel somewhere where they cannot physically go. And this is our role. This has always been our role. So we're called to action even more so than before.
The Afrolit Sans Frontières Festival runs until the 27th of April. Lindy Mtongana, CGTN, Nairobi.
A Senegalese musician has composed a song paying tribute to Chinese medical teams that helped in battling the COVID-19 epidemic in Wuhan. CGTN's Jean Kerr with the details.
Chik Tidiane is a music composer. He's using his talent to educate the world on the health crisis caused by the coronavirus. Together with a group of other musicians, Tidiane has embarked on a project entitled Guardian Angel, a tribute song saluting the efforts of Chinese doctors involved in the fight against this pandemic.
Les paroles vont droit au cœur, hein?
The lyrics of this song go straight to the heart. The song is about patients who express their sensitivity and testify to the availability of the people who cared for them. It is about a patient who shows that the doctor has forgotten his world, forgotten his life to keep the patients alive, and it is very touching. This patient wants to tell the doctor that the world is his or her own, that he or she spends all night and all day at the disposal of the person with the virus.
Le monde est à lui.
Le monde est à ce médecin qui...
This project is an initiative of the China Media Group. It brings together CGTN and China Radio International.
Radio Chine Internationale et CGTN.
China International Radio and CGTN French have come together to help raise awareness against the coronavirus. We believe that artists are pathfinders, and through them we can get the message across to as many people as possible. Here in Senegal, we had targeted several artists, but Chik was the first to react favorably. He is an artist who has already been to China 3 times, so he's a friend of China. We are happy to work with him.
Réagir en fait positivement.
The efforts of Chinese doctors have been praised around the world, including in Senegal.
C'est vraiment féliciter les médecins chinois.
We must congratulate the Chinese doctors who have managed to put in place a response plan that is up to the task. It is important to emphasize that the Chinese response plan is a model that can inspire us, but we must also be able to adapt it to the realities. Today, there are models that have proven their worth, but that may not necessarily work in our context because our realities are different. Any program must be adapted to the socio-demographic situation of the country.
Parce que nos réalités sont différentes.
The pandemic has already claimed lives in the West African country, but doctors are positive that they will manage to contain the disease. Jean Keo, CGTN.
Coming up in sports. German Bundesliga sets the groundwork for a possible return to action.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
German clubs are targeting the resumption of games next month following a 2-month shutdown due to the coronavirus pandemic. The resumption is